It is now being recorded. Thank you very much, Steve.
Mhm. Okay, afternoon all. Okay, so this is a thesis examination for Walter Wong. And Walter's supervisor is Niall Savage. His advisor is Christina Verissimo. And Nicole Wiedemann will be his external examiner today. Okay, so Walter will take about 16 minutes or so I'll let him continue, and we're off to the races. So over to you, Walter.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for letting me talk. Last month, Beijing bypassed Hong Kong's legislature to impose the national security law, criminalizing just about any acts that threaten national security. A heavy blow to Hong Kong's autonomy and freedom promised in the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration. This was just the latest in a series of assaults by Beijing in the last decade since Xi Jinping came into power. In addition to increasing political repression, the people of Hong Kong have long suffered economic repression, facing challenges such as severely constrained living space and world-leading inequality. And all of this culminates in a growingly defiant demand for human dignity. Recognizing the political repression and spatial repression happening in Hong Kong today, the thesis is conceived as an occupation of the city, reconfiguring the infrastructure into a place for public inhabitation, living, and working. It is an elevated linear park with co-working and co-living spaces in and above the park, where facilities and services are deprivatized and shared. The average living space per person in Hong Kong is small. It's not working. Can you actually see me? Or never mind. The average living space per person in Hong Kong is small. At 160 square feet, it is much lower than other densely populated cities such as Tokyo, Singapore, and New York. The lack of space is partly due to the geographic constraints in Hong Kong. Bounded by ocean and steep slopes, there's no space to expand. In particular, Hong Kong Island, which is where the central business district is located, the urbanization is squeezed into a narrow strip along the harbor. Land policy is also to blame. The government, which owns all of the land, is incentivized to limit land supply because land sales make up a large part of their income. Although Hong Kong has a relatively high average income, its inequality is also quite high. The top fifth earns 14 times the bottom fifth. So the median income is actually much less than the average. So although the average of 160 square feet per person, the size of approximately a parking space, provides a relatively luxurious and livable space, the median, the commoners do not quite get that average. They must fit into small spaces where storage becomes a problem and where they're forced to utilize the vertical space. Politically, Hong Kong is a Chinese city whose culture is deeply rooted in Confucianism, which teaches self-suppression, obedience, and respect for social hierarchy. However, as Beijing in the last decade tightened its grip on the city and limited its freedom, that obedience broke down and the people revolted. Can architecture provide any political and economic agency in such a neoliberal and pro-market city? I think through sharing space in a pluralistic and layered manner, we can optimize the utility of space while creating opportunities for free enterprise and free expression. As giving a voice to the people now becomes urgent and imperative, the architecture must adopt a pluralism that allows for tactical and flexible use, where voices from various social sectors can intersect in the everyday life. In response, the design will be located at the city center with highly developed public transport, offer a mix of use and mix of scales that cater to different people, and also blur the boundaries between programs to allow for spontaneous intersections. Henry Lefebvre warns about commoditized spaces like shopping malls because their defining homogeneity causes marginalization and frustrations. Economist Jeremy Rifkin envisions a future where shared access, not ownership, is key to economic liberation. The design adopts this thinking and will occupy the urban void, the only spaces left that are not commoditized in the city. And to legitimize this move, the design will comply with local regulations, protecting the existing buildings' access to daylight and fresh air. Facilities will be shared, and storage will be provided where needed for this sharing-based lifestyle. Ramcool has this angry rant about junk space, which features an endless, commoditized, disorienting interior, gives critical hints about making pluralistic spaces. The strategy here is to invert and fracture the podium tower topology, which commonly features a very interior shopping mall. This strategy allows views and relationship to the context, and also elements of vertical circulations will be placed at the perimeters of the buildings and be clearly displayed to show the accessibility of the upper public space. Finally, to create an urban environment that serves the people at the human scale, we use terracing to increase relatability of public spaces at various heights. We also focus on the edges between circulation and programs as key moments to activate the everyday life. This is where boundaries are blurred and lives intersect. Finally, when you try to share not a lot of space with the most people possible, privacy becomes of concern. Privacy is, I want to note here, it's not simply a way to conceal yourself, but at the core is about the ability to control how we present ourselves to others. The strategy here includes depth, meaning creating a series of spaces or turns before which one can reach the subject, giving a sense of defensibility. The half wall helps limit the directions in which you need to address approaching people without disrupting the continuity of the larger space. And finally, operable devices help turn open spaces into private spaces, adding utility and versatility. I choose my site in Central on the south side of the harbor, where wealth, power, and talent are most concentrated. It is hyper-connected with multiple MTR lines, ferry terminals, and 2 arterial roadways cutting through, and an extensive network of elevated pedestrian walkways. There's a rich array of amenities in the area, including local markets, upscale shopping, and office towers. This is Connaught Road, which creates a rift in the city, separating a ground-based public realm to the south and an elevated public realm to the north. This is a model of the existing condition. If I take out the southern buildings, you can see that the elevated public realm is merely connected by a couple footbridges over Connaught Road. The first move is to use this urban void and to create a new public realm over the road. In replacement, a park with terraformed pavilions and canopied pathways is the opposite of the big box mall. Glass volumes intermittently interrupt the terraformed pavilions as public gathering spaces. Here, they publicly display the vertical circulations that provide access to the continued public realm over the roofs of these pavilions. In addition, residential towers are lifted over the tops of the pavilions, ensuring continuity of the park space. The massing of the towers complies with daylight-related regulations, meaning that they often need to dodge the taller buildings to the north, giving residents views of the ocean. Taking a section like this, we can see this regulation in action. The residential towers confront different height limits based on their distances to the buildings on either side. Also, the 3-to-1 daylight angle requirement for residential spaces means that they need to stay away from or just dodge the super tall buildings. This is a view of the park with the terraformed pavilions. The massing design clearly shows the vertical circulation where the park continues. The pavilions are volumetrically monolithic, but are soft and ephemeral in their metal mesh facades. People can take a walk in the park or simply straight through underneath the canopy system, or even take the expressway, the travelators on the right-hand side. The edges of the programs are opportunities for enrichment and spontaneity. Here, the sawtooth half-wall edges of the cafe create blurred boundaries. The cubic furniture measuring 40 centimeters, just a tad lower than the standard chair height, creates a hyper-domestic scale at the eye level and allows for all kinds of creative rearrangement and inhabitations. A large amount of space is dedicated to storage to support the shared spaces. The software startup founder could take out presentation materials from the lockers and publicly demo their software in the market space below, and maybe encounter a private banker taking a stroll in the park and grabbing a coffee from the cafe, who happens to be out looking for investment opportunities. Also, at the same time, aspiring musicians, social activists can broadcast their art and messages to the world. These intersections in the public life plant the seeds for magical blossoms in the future. The glass volumes that joins the terraformed co-working pavilions serves as the main direct route to the upper public realm and a place for public gathering. The half walls at the edge of the co-working spaces create a sense of protection and privacy, while the lowered viewing balconies clear the view for maximal opportunity for participating in the public space. Again, the edge is used to create the most activation, catering to various inhabitations and needs, while serving as a device of controlling privacy by creating layers in between spaces. Many of the same strategies applied in the co-living spaces. Here, two 3-level housing blocks hold up a steel frame triple height communal space, offering a larger variety of scales of living spaces than traditionally available. Again, the main vertical circulations are placed at the perimeter transparently. With an exoskeleton structure, the housing blocks are also designed to allow for flexible future configuration. In this particular design, the individual closets are oriented to maximize both visual and auditory privacy. The shared bathing areas feature racks to hang your towels and toiletries together to eliminate the need to carry them from your room every time. Residents arrive by escalators at the second level, where they remove their shoes and proceed by stairs to their private units. The triple height space is again defined by a half wall edge. The table along this edge acts as a device to modulate privacy. Lean over and you can have a chat with your neighbor, or sit back and stare at your computer to signal that you're occupied with something else. The residential units also feature a high level of reconfigurability to accommodate more different kinds of residents. A pod can join with another one to make a bigger one, fitting 2 people. Or any pod can be replaced with either a washroom module or a kitchen module per the user's requirement. Here, with these modules, we're able to create a 2-bed apartment in peaceful coexistence with the other co-living units. The pods are designed to allow for maximal flexibility and control of privacy. The bed can be retracted into the 20-centimeter plenum space to transform the pod into a living space. The privacy screens can totally enclose the pod or be totally opened up to make a larger social space. Ample waist height surface areas are provided around the head of the bed, allowing for most convenient access to the most intimate belongings. And the movable tables can be used as a work desk or a coffee table during the day. The lower platform provides a large amount of storage space for more permanent items such as luggage and out-of-season clothing, while doubling as a seating space. On the other hand, the vertical closet provides more instantly accessible storage that can be easily accessed with the bed either up or down. Without space for a balcony, a 30 centimeter deep planter is integrated into the depth of the exoskeleton structure of the building. With sliding glass door fully opened, it transforms the space into a sort of outdoor garden. From public to private spaces, this project uses decommoditization as the core strategy to bring about an environment that is pluralistic and democratic. I believe at the core that the opportunities for lives to intersect one another is deeply empowering, not just economically, but also intellectually and psychologically. I I hope that this type of design can serve as the beginning of the mending of the deep wounds that have been so incredibly unfairly inflicted in this hometown of mine, Hong Kong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Walter. Okay, so we'll open it up now to comments and questions, starting with Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Walter. I enjoyed looking at your report and really having just absorbing more of the context and how you're situating your project in a political situation and then sort of physically in a very specific location in Hong Kong. Obviously, it's all political, but it was very nice that you sort of broadened the notion of context and really gave me a sense of how your project is a response to events and to specific places. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
For me, it's a really hard question for architecture in many respects. You know, how, and it's not one that shouldn't be asked, but it's a challenging one. Like how do we begin to undo sort of I don't think you'd say this, but undo injustices, or how to actually make right certain conditions, how to enable a population to sort of emerge within an oppressive condition. And I think it's a very difficult question, and you've mentioned sort of a few things that I can begin to hold on to as an architect. You know, within the language that we work, which is space and material and sort of those types of things, the things that I tended to gravitate toward were you're talking about pluralistic spaces, multi-layered spaces, those are programmatic conditions. You talked about different types of ways to begin to describe privacy. You also talked in your report about squeeze spaces that are sort of have a constraint to them. You talked about materialism and obedience. Then your reference to Lefebvre, the social space. These are all, in my mind, mechanisms that you're trying to use, ways that you're trying to use to sort of change this larger political context. And I think I understand that correctly. But could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, how is the architecture, does the way in which we make architecture need to be different given the context that you're situating it in? When I look at some of the images, like the planter and things like that, that would be nice for anybody, right? And that's fine. But I'm just trying to figure out how do I, in such a difficult site, how does architecture make a difference? This is probably more of a conversation than it is a critique, but it's something that I was struck with when I was looking at your work and reading your report. So maybe we can have a conversation about this.
Yeah, sure. I think what I'm trying to say in the report is almost trying to oppose this developer-driven model of development where every square foot is sold for a price and every square foot is supposed to make a certain amount of money, a certain amount of return on investment. But what I'm saying here is that by allowing for the space to be sort of ambiguous and allowing them to be appropriated by anyone, then that become an empowering agents for all kinds of people. And I think that is really at the heart of what I'm trying to show here is that using, like maybe through the arrangement of the programs and the way that the space relate to one another, we can start to create this blurred boundary conditions that allow for people to intersect with one another.
Yeah, and in that respect, if you can go to the sort of axonometric view of your project, where you're looking at the multiple buildings and the horizontal datum.
This one?
Keep going. One more, maybe. Yeah, one more.
This one?
One more. There you go. Perfect.
Oh.
Yeah, either way. But for me, when I begin to think about spaces that can be maybe co-opted or shared in respect in various ways, then the horizontal datum is really interesting to me, that elevated plane. And one of the reasons it's really interesting to me is it's somewhere between, it's a built condition, but it's more infrastructure in many respects than it is building. And so it sort of lies as, it doesn't lie clearly into ownership, right? It's sort of something, right? So that's interesting. And we also associate public spaces that, unless they're owned by the building, right, then they control it with certain time frames. Public spaces also are often spaces that have voice, that can be used to speak. And actually, really recently, with the riots that were happening around our country, an interstate right in the center of Austin became that public space, which was really quite fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So that, again, infrastructure became a place of engagement in various ways, big ways and probably small ways.
Right.
That for me, because of how it operates in many respects, is the most powerful part of your project. I'm not suggesting that co-living isn't important. In fact, I think that program works well as you know, that also does that. But the sharing, or you use the word, the intersection of people, as being very important, the potential for intersection, that horizontal datum seems very strong to me in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think along with that would be the development of circulation, because that again is sort of that place of intersection, and that space that isn't owned by any one person. The circulation that either threads itself connecting to the city, or also begins to thread itself into these co-living buildings or other programs. That circulation, I think, also has that potential.
Yes, yes. That's why I made the clear vertical circulation a big part of the project.
Mm-hmm. So given your position, how you're positioning architecture, it's a very subversive project. I think you agree. So what does that mean to you? Like, how, when I look at this, I don't see, like, if you showed me the image without the words surrounding it, I wouldn't necessarily see it as a subversive project. So what does subversive architecture mean, or how is it subversive? Is it good that it isn't seen as subversive? I can't say the word.
Sorry, is it good what?
Is it good because I don't see it as something that undermines the status quo?
I think so. So one of the strategy, which is labeled here, is legitimacy, right? Which is by following the rules of the government, we're saying that, hey, we're just trying to do something good. We're not trying to subvert you. So subversion is part of this project, I would say. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to try to make big propaganda signs about what message you're trying to bring, but rather you just kind of leave that space available for people to bring their voices in. So yes, subversion was kind of part of it. Not quite explicitly so in the report or the project, but through the process of designing the project, it was quite subversive. Yeah.
Well, it's a question of whether, is an architecture that is subversive, how might it be different?
How would it look like, right?
Well, that might be a question. Like it might be a naive question, but it is one that I have. Like, one way to sort of intervene within this context would be to be unseen, perhaps, right? Like, or is it a question of economies? And so then is it still about the profitability of the land, but then there's sort of something that is attached to that profit that allows for other things to occur? Again, it's more of a conversation than it is a
right.
But,
So part of the project is one strategy was allowing for a mix of uses, which brings different social classes together. So it's not just for the disenfranchised people. It's also for people working in the adjacent high-end offices who want to take a walk in the park. It's bringing all these people together in one place that create these intersections. So I forgot what I was going to say, but so yes, the mix of use was a key strategy in making the project works for everyone, and it's this kind of arrangement of programs that allows for this subversive architecture to take place.
Yeah, and then in that sense, the platform is very important. I'm going to stop talking, but if you could take us to one of your sectional views that shows that platform and then the building, that would be great. And I'll stop talking.
Mm-hmm.
Can you zoom out? There's another image of that section, is there?
This one?
Yeah, that section, but zoomed out. That one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm, Walter, one of the things that is also in my mind is I feel so to critique the project, I would say that the architecture itself, like the siding makes sense, all of those things up to the point of the architecture, and I would just like to turn it up a little bit. Like I really would like to know, the landscape for me looks, it could be somewhere between the High Line or any place, any city that is rethinking their highways today, and why that's economically viable, why it's socially important. But I'd like to know more. Like I just would like to see the architecture turned up a little bit more, given the political impact that you hope this will happen. And so that would be my one critique, that I wouldn't want this project to look like other projects in some way. And maybe it's not always seen, but I would just be curious how you could really allow it to be as powerful as you want it to be. And
I see. I agree. Yeah.
Okay. So Niall, Christina, would you like to jump in here?
So thank you, Walter. Nice presentation. You were crisp, man. You were crisp. So from the comments from Nicole and so on, and actually something that I've been sort of thinking about for a long time is, how subversive it is. How that word subversive, and your take on that. So is it possible to be subversive and polite at the same time? And I think that some of the reactions to the actual architecture itself, you would expect, given your intro, that it was going to be much more radical, you know, that there was going to be a real sense of an occupation that's taking place. And I've said these things to you before, right? So,
yeah.
And I think fair enough though. Like, so the idea of legitimacy, you introduced the idea of legitimacy. So in order to do something, to make change, you have to work with the rules, is sort of what you're saying. And so therefore the architecture also is working within the rules of the architecture of that place. And so, and I think what Nicole is saying is that the opportunity is here to make something other than that, something that is more in you know, in the tenor of an occupation, of another form, another organism that is infiltrating like a virus into this city, into the urban form and the morphology of it.
Right.
I really do think though that you know, the carefulness of how you constructed your argument, identifying the parts that are important to your argument is really wonderfully done. And you know, and I think also I've been pushing a long time the idea of the park itself. You know, the park is actually the central thing. You know, as Nicole was saying, you know, the first move is to actually take over a part of the urban infrastructure and then inhabit it. That to me is the real occupation. And so when I'm looking at these images and I'm thinking about the architecture, I'm always trying to make a connection between the person that's in there. How many square feet do they get?
100 in gross building area.
Yeah, 100 square feet, and how they are absolutely connected to this completely other world. You know, this new park. So that the relationship, and particularly in section, about connecting the individual to the public into this new zone seems to be the most important thing to that relationship is the one that, as if this is a whole world. I think you are making a world, but as if it's a whole world now existing within the Grand Canyon of, you know, of Hong Kong. So I think that the more concentration could be about actually inhabiting that park. The ways that park is actually inhabited. So it's not so much that I've got a park and then I put some buildings on it, but it's more about the actual, what does it mean to inhabit the public sphere like that?
Yeah, that's a fair comment. Yeah.
I think it's an ambitious and thoroughly worked out thing that you've done, like down to the details of the privacy screens and the gardens and all of those sorts of things. And you know, so I think as a thesis, there's a sense of completion about it, but it does elicit questions, right? That about other things. As say.
So, no, Nicole, go ahead.
Just small. Along with that, the connection that Niall's talking about between the pods and below. For me, and you described it. You sort of talked about there might be a chance meeting in which someone's life might be changed. You know, like a person who's designing something, a program, I'm not sure, might meet someone who has the money to invest in it. And I guess I'm sort of thinking about the broader social support that might be sort of a social infrastructure that might be intertwined within this. So the program, like how you decide on programs that are between the public datum and the living pods would be very interesting to me. And so I would be thinking about, how do I support people with that are trying to sort of survive in this context? Well, daycare, like support for children, food. Can I think about the plants not just as sort of pleasant to experience and good for the environment, but can they grow things? Like is actually a broader network of food. Are there, what are the ways that I can, the co-work space, that makes sense. Now I have a space that's shared for working and that also helps support people. So that for me it'd be very interesting to think diagrammatically with what you've already created. What is the social infrastructure that actually enables people to sort of rise above or at least survive sort of within
the ecosystem, right?
yeah, but socially derived, but ecosystem, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, I think we're always gratified to create this closed system that is that supports itself magically. It grows its own food, it makes its own electricity, it's self-sustained. We call this sustainable architecture. But I think in this case here, we have to also understand the context of the project, which is that this is a neoliberal city. Like everything is accessible. If you can buy food for quite cheap because the price have been competed to death. So everything is very accessible in the markets. So this is really about adding an infrastructure on top of an existing network that really, and so when I think about the program, it's really about thinking what adds to it rather than how it can sustain itself in a closed loop.
I understand that. And for me, storage seems to be a bit of an outlier. Like that seems related to the living situation, right? So that makes sense to me. And I guess I would, and I don't know enough about what you're describing, obviously. I'm completely removed from this. And you can begin to speak to this, but my question would be if, would it make sense to, in this close proximity, to have childcare support or other things like that that enable people with a very diminished income to actually support each other? And maybe it's less about paying someone, maybe it's a different idea of childcare. Maybe it's a space that allows for families to sort of support each other while parents are working. It's just a question of programming that actually allows for more of a network for people that I think are pretty disenfranchised, not to remove the pedestrian path and sort of that public sphere, but these other things that are more of a safety net that maybe don't occur currently.
Is there a real underground economy in Hong Kong?
What do you mean by?
Well, I'm thinking about, people that are just, set up a little kiosk, or, they set up a box and they sell their wares, and, that they sell you parts for things and so on. Is this that kind of a place where that kind of emerging would happen?
Yeah, like you mean like what you would see at like a farmer's market
Different kind of marketplace, a different kind of marketplace,
It's very limited.
So there's those co-work spaces, and then out in the park, along the covered pathways and so on, there's places for people to set up kiosks, or selling their wares, or providing services, healthcare, whatever, all sorts of things. As if the whole city, everything that the city offers is now available here, as like a city within the city.
Yeah, I think I think, well, Hong Kong is mostly a service-based economy, so or knowledge-based economy. So right now there isn't much about I don't know, selling crafts or selling wares in a very traditional sense of the marketplace. So that's why I kind of think about this project from the service economy standpoint and create spaces for that.
Yeah. May I jump in? Well, thank you so much. This was quite a journey, right? And I believe that knowing Hong Kong and how particular it is and how particular it was created, right? I mean, it was a place that became an island, extend towards the continent, and even inventing as the walled city. So, I mean, everything happens here with the most, I mean, incredible the data you show us that the most richest people on earth were living in Hong Kong. We at the same time as the people with less resources. So this is a city of extremes. And I remember that when you first came with this topic, the questions would be, what are you gonna take from? Because we could go from a situation that we have case studies again, like Wall City, you could create again something like that in an architectural way, let's put it that way, right? But then you said to me, no, I think we can understand the system and work with the system to empower the people. And that was the most incredible message I heard. So what you said is that Hong Kong is only urban in a very few areas of the island. All the rest is pretty much landscape because you can't build in very steep sides. But you could say, I could go there to build for these people. But then you would put these people aside. You could even say, could I go towards the water? Yes, you could. But you still put these people aside. What if you give and empower these people by building something for them in the heart of the city using the laws of Hong Kong? And what was incredible for us to learn that maybe the laws they invented, that was just to segregate people, to separate them, would be the same laws that you use to build something not only for everybody, but to place people that really needs a home in the heart of Hong Kong. And that to me was like, yes, this is what you have to do. And I believe that what you create was ability to understand there is a land that belongs to everybody, that is built by the government, such as an infrastructure. And please, everybody has to remember that everybody could go in a car and go across the island in a very short time. So circulation was really a machine they implemented in Hong Kong for the rich people to use and to get from home to work without being disturbed. And you say, I'm gonna use these fast lanes, very wide fast lanes for such a city. And you said, maybe it's on top of this land that belongs to everybody, that was implemented by the government, that I can create a system, an organism that can grow because this infrastructure covers the island. And so what you can say is that wherever there is an infrastructure, such as a street, such as a highway, you can empower people. And that's what you did. Now, people in Hong Kong are incredible entrepreneurs. They can live out of nothing. They can create a life out of nothing. The moment you give them an opportunity and an idea, they will take it, right, Walter? This is what you're giving them. You're just giving them an idea for them to say, I can be here. I can live in a place where just very rich people can live, and I can be here with them, sharing my life and sharing the spaces with them. and we can empower them because of that. And I think that's the strongest message anybody could build, even though you have many opportunities to prove that you could create housing and public space, but to create housing and public space in the heart of this city, which is a machine, you empower them, because what you create is a really incredible organism that puts people together. I congratulate you for that. And
Thanks.
Thank you for the journey.
Thanks, that's amazing. You said it better than I did.
You taught me, Walter. What are you talking about?
So amazing.
Yeah, that's what you meant. That's what you meant. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, actually at this point, if you like, we can open it up to the backbenchers to see if we have any questions from other people in the audience. You can turn on your mic if you like. Go on, occupy.
Occupy.
Walter, I was curious. Were you in Hong Kong during this past year, during the protests and all that stuff, and maybe even extend not this past year, but maybe in 2014 during the Umbrella Revolution? And I'm wondering if that has inspired you to make any of these decisions, or design decisions, or architectural decisions in your project.
Yeah, I was not in the city in 2014 or 2019. I was there in 2018 for an exchange at the University of Hong Kong. That was just before that the whole anti-extradition bill movement started. But I am a Hong Konger, and I follow the news very, very closely. They often would live stream the protests on Facebook, so to give you like an instant view of what's going on. So yes, the politics of the city has kind of compelled me to make art in the city, to make art about the city. So this is really very much a response to what's going on, and this is about giving agency to people and creating places where democratic activities could happen.
You mentioned that where democracy can happen in these zones, and could you imagine that your intervention in the city could facilitate these protests, or even be like a safe haven for police?
So my thinking, so my thinking is that I originally wanted this to be almost like a protest site, but then when I thought about it more, I thought what the city needed the most is places for really intellectual enrichment and social engagements in order to bring people together. Right now, the city is in a very hateful state, and what we really need is really for political discourse to happen in the public realm, and a place where everyone can come together and unite together. So it's not so much a protest site, but this is where people come and share their views and voices.
The only reason why I'm bringing this up because I'm also a native of Hong Kong, so I was present at Hong Kong last year during the protests.
Oh.
And so yeah, so it has really changed my view on a lot of things, being in such a city that I grew up in and I love, right? So but I think it would have been worthwhile for you to kind of look at what was the source of these hatefulness? Like, what was the source of this kind of social unrest, right? And it's these multi-layered of things that you've already covered really in your research, right? And you know how real estate prices are really unreasonable, and how one of the richest city in the world has the highest kind of like wealth inequalities.
Inequality,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there could be a lot more research going into how the government policy kind of pushed towards the situation to so that how it kind of like spun out of control. I think that there could be a little bit more research on that. During my time in Hong Kong, I spoke to one of your classmates during your exchange at Hong Kong University. Her name is Jennifer Ip. So her thesis was about land shortages problem in Hong Kong, and her angle was utilizing brownfields in Hong Kong, and and the entire kind of like conversation was government is hiding these brownfield sites for many reasons, right? And then I find it interesting because you really wanted to kind of like keep people at the center of the urban center, right? And would there be also an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? There's all these kind of like unused lands, brownfields that's maybe a little bit further than the city center, like maybe in Kowloon or maybe in new territories, but as Christina has said, that people of Hong Kong pounds at the opportunity that comes at them. So and with the attitude of Hong Kong people, like I think that if we give them the opportunity to kind of like start a new urban center, I think that's all very welcome.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to utilize the brownfields. I've kind of looked into that, but I think that would be a great thing to do. But just in this thesis, I kind of chose to utilize an existing network happening already in the city.
For sure.
Yeah, I hope this is just one angle into
of course.
How we could make Hong Kong a better place.
Sure. Great.
But thanks. That's some great. Great
thank
comment.
you for your presentation. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've kind of reached our time here. Any final words from the examining committee?
Thank you very much, Walter.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Really great.
Right.
Go aside.
Go aside. Am I free to go?
Free to go as a bird.
You do have your democratic self-governing decision-making processes in place, so you can make whatever decision you feel like.
That was a great project. Thank you, Walter.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here.
Happy to.
Okay.
I'll stop recording now.
Okay.